My name is Emily, a 38-year-old office worker. Today should have been my 10th wedding anniversary, but the person who showed up at the anniversary dinner wasn't just my husband, Rick, whom I had arranged to meet.
I'm sorry to intrude on your celebration, but I thought it's time for your wife to get a grip on reality.
The one who said this, either deliberately or naively, was Sophia, an office staff who worked at Rick's clinic. She said it with a snicker that seemed to intentionally rub people the wrong way. Sophia must be about 23, having graduated from college and started working last spring. Reality? What reality do I need to understand exactly? I said that while glancing at Rick, who was sitting next to Sophia opposite of me. He grinned wickedly at me.
Well, despite my obvious efforts to exclude you, you never noticed anything about me and Sophia, right? There's no need to hide it anymore. So I thought we might as well clear the air.
That's because Rick and I are in love. So I'd like you to step aside quickly.
Sophia said that while flaunting a shining ring on her left ring finger. So, you two were having an affair, and now you want to marry her, so I'm in the way.
Even now, you're not shedding a single tear. You really are a scary woman. But yay, you're right, and I'm not going to deny it. I'm not a monster. I'm willing to give you some money if you leave me.
Rick said this with a smug look, and Sophia gazed at him adoringly. I lost my appetite, even for the fancy French full course, so I decided to leave. But before I did, I turned to Rick and Sophia and said, if we're going to split up, I'll need some time to prepare. Let's say next Thursday afternoon. It's your clinic's day off, so that should work well for you, right? With that, I left the restaurant. I hailed a cab on the street and gave the driver my parents' address. As I gazed out at the night view, I murmured to myself, how did it all come to this? And began to reflect on how Rick and I met and our 10 years of marriage. We met 15 years ago. It was when I had just graduated from college and started working at a real estate management company. Rick, the same age as me, had been commuting from his parents' home in a neighboring state to college. But from his 5th year in medical school, clinical training got so busy that he wanted to rent an apartment or condo near the university to get more sleep. However, he couldn't find a place that met all his needs within his budget, which was a common issue. After being turned away by several other realtors, he came to our real estate agency. Finding a place that meets all your criteria within your budget is a bit difficult. I think you'll have a hard time at other agencies too. I said that to him after showing him some options and visiting 2 of them. Even if he liked them, they were twice his budget. He didn't seem too worried, thinking he might find a hidden gem. So I took a chance and spoke my mind, even though it might be rude to a customer. Rick was surprised, asking, really? So I won't find anything at other real estate agencies either. He didn't seem angry, more like he genuinely thought he could make it work. If you really want to live around this station, you might find something if you're willing to compromise on other conditions. He thought of my suggestion for a while, then said he'd come back another time. Honestly, I thought we wouldn't do business with him and forgot about it. But 2 years later in the spring, Rick came back. He had graduated from medical school and passed the medical board exams, starting his 2-year residency. He said he could afford a higher rent this time. We looked at several properties with his new budget, and he chose one in the same area where I was living alone. Of course, I didn't tell him that, but when I mentioned how good and affordable the local supermarket and the Chinese restaurant's lunch are, he figured it out. Soon, we started running into each other in the neighborhood, after work or on weekends. Initially wary, I was drawn to Rick's carefree laughter and we eventually started dating. Even though he went to the US for medical training for a year, we decided to get married when I was 28, 3 years into our relationship. At that time, Rick had just transferred to a hospital run by a senior's family. He had prioritized repaying his student loans, so I paid for our new home and most other expenses. We debated about the wedding but decided on a small family reception at my father's insistence. I wore the wedding dress my grandmother had made for my mother. My mother had passed away when I was in high school, but wearing her carefully preserved dress, I saw my usually cheerful father and brother cry, saying, "I wish your mother could have seen this. Surely she's watching from above," he said, tears flowing unabashedly. Seeing this, I couldn't help but cry too. Seeing me tear up, my aunt, also getting teary-eyed, said, "Oh dear, your makeup will run. Tears are a no-no for a bride," as she dabbed at my tears with her handkerchief. Looking back now, I think that moment during my wedding to Rick might have been the happiest in our marriage. We kept our honeymoon local and budget-friendly, just a trip to a nearby resort. Rick, looking a bit guilty for not arranging a lavish trip like some of his friends did, apologized. I took his hand and said, "Don't worry about it. What matters is feeling happy, not comparing ourselves to others." And so, we enjoyed hopping from one place to another during our honeymoon, hand in hand. For a while after, as a young doctor, Rick often had night shifts. Even though we lived in the same house, I would leave for work when he was asleep, and often return to find he was not there. I ended up taking care of all the household chores, but the increase in housework after marrying Rick was minimal. Since we rarely ate at home, it was mostly just more laundry. The cleaning was about the same whether I was alone or with Rick, so it didn't bother me much. What worried me more was Rick's health. He often skipped proper meals at the hospital, settling for snack foods or cold takeout. Seeing the dark circles under his eyes, I could only say, "Doctors collapsing from overwork isn't unheard of. Are you sure you're okay? Please relax when you're at home." Around that time, an unexpected opportunity came Rick's way. An elderly doctor, a senior alumnus of Rick's university and a colleague of his mentor, was considering retirement. He was looking for someone to take over his patients. His maternity clinic was known for its trusted, personalized care and was popular among families for generations. The owners then, a couple who had run the clinic together, had no family or relatives to pass it on to and were at a loss. Rick's mentor suggested him for the job. Coming from a non-medical family, Rick seemed like the perfect successor. Although he was initially hesitant about obstetrics and gynecology, Rick was inspired by the sense of mission he felt from the owners during his visit and decided to take up the mantle. From then on, despite the frequent night shifts, Rick was dedicated to his mission of overseeing the miracle of life. I supported him as best I could, standing by his side. Rick started his new life as the town's obstetrician-gynecologist at the old doctor's maternity clinic. The cheerful and young Rick quickly became popular at the clinic, with patients saying they felt reassured knowing he was taking over it. Around that time, I began visiting the clinic more often on weekends, learning about business and personnel management from the retiring director's wife. People often asked me when we would have our own baby. Apparently, whenever asked, Rick would say, "I'd welcome a baby anytime, but my wife wants to prioritize her career for now." I knew he meant no harm, But every time someone took his words to heart and told me, work is important, but consider your physical capability, it felt like a tight squeeze on my heart. The reason I couldn't prioritize starting a family wasn't career ambition, but the financial burden that fell heavily on me. It was 10 years since Rick graduated. We had just finished paying off his student loans, but our life together wasn't exactly comfortable. Rick's salary as a doctor was decent, but he always said, when I take over the clinic, I'll get the existing medical equipment, but there are things I want to upgrade. We need to save as much as we can for that, on top of the payment to the clinic owners. So we put almost all of his salary into savings, and I covered our living expenses with mine. Around the same time, Rick's dad retired early due to health issues, leaving his mom worried about their smaller than expected pension and severance package. She asked us to send them $1,000 a month. I thought this was too much and discussed it with Rick. He responded indecisively, saying, if I take on that burden, we won't be able to save $12,000 a year, affecting our credit and collateral when borrowing for the clinic. He only replied with hesitant words. Meanwhile, my phone was bombarded with calls from my mother-in-law, begging for help, affecting my work. Eventually, we settled on using my entire bonus for their support, with any shortfall covered from my savings. This meant I absolutely couldn't afford to take time off work, putting farts of a child on hold. I had come to terms with it, but I wished Rick had at least confided in the clinic owners. Why make it seem like it was my selfishness preventing us from having a child? Looking back, I realized that this was when small doubts and irritations about Rick began to accumulate in my mind. Finally, Rick took over the clinic. Most of the staff, being older, retired, so we needed to hire new staff. The clinic building was also aging and needed reconstruction for better earthquake resistance. While the previous owners covered the demolition and removal costs, the expenses for the land, new building, modern medical equipment, computers, and furnishings for the hospitalization facilities flew away like feathers. Luckily, we retained the existing patients and attracted many new ones to the newly renovated clinic, so there was no worry about running out of operating funds. I was supposed to quit my job and help at the clinic full-time, but considering the financial support from my mother-in-law, I decided to keep my weekday job and help at the clinic on weekends. After about a year, my co-workers, knowing about Rick's clinic, often visited as patients. But around that time, I started receiving hesitant messages like, I hate to say this, but... They mostly said the same thing. The attitude of the doctor and the receptionist is concerning. Some were more specific, saying, I had an appointment, but the consultation was rushed and ended abruptly, or the nursing staff keeps changing, making it unsettling. True enough, staff who said they wanted to work long-term during interviews were leaving within just 2 months. When I was handling employment insurance paperwork, I found it odd and asked Rick about the high staff turnover. He said, maybe their expectations didn't match reality. You know, maternity clinics are often associated with the joy of meeting babies, but there are tough outcomes in medical settings too. Maybe that broke their spirit. I accepted that explanation at the time. But upon further reflection, the number of staff leaving seemed too high, and there were other unsettling incidents. So I started visiting the clinic not just on weekends but on weekdays too, trying to leave my job early without overtime. But then Rick told me, from now on, all accounting will be handled by the office staff. You don't need to come here anymore. He even changed all the passwords for the accounting software so I couldn't access them. All the account books I had printed and stored were missing, and when I asked Rick about it, he snapped, "You're out of the accounting now. Don't criticize the new person's way." Effectively, I was banned from the clinic. Then, on our 10-year anniversary today, Rick and Sophia, the receptionist he's rumored to be involved with, told me to step aside. Let's see how well things go your way. A week later, Rick and Sophia showed up at the same French restaurant we used to visit, arm in arm, almost like a couple. They were surprised to see a man sitting next to me. When Rick asked who he was, Sophia smugly said, "She didn't want to sit here all alone, did she? Let's be generous." They both sat down, grinning. Then the man next to me stood up, showed his lawyer's badge, and handed his business card to Rick and Sophia, saying, "You might think I'm just for show, but I'm a lawyer, make no mistake." Rick and Sophia froze for a moment, but then plastered smug smiles on their faces. Rick blurted out, "Sorry to disappoint, but Emily and I never filed a marriage certificate, so any talk of dividing assets is pointless." Sophia, looking triumphant, crossed her arms and looked at me. But the lawyer and I ignored them. Annoyed by my expression of indifference, Sophia snapped, "Are you even listening? I'm saying you were never Rick's wife. Do you get it?" I stared back at Rick and Sophia, then said, "Rick, with a brain like yours, it's a wonder you became a doctor. I've known for a long time we weren't legally married. Really, how could you think I wouldn't know?" I laughed heartily, leaving them dumbfounded. The lawyer then pointed out, with a relationship spanning 10 years, you'd have had to renew your driver's license, passport, and receive voter registration cards, right? Ever wonder why they still came in your maiden name? His face turned to shock. When renting our current apartment, of course, we had to submit a proof of residency. Do you know what it says about you? I'm the head of the household and you're listed as husband, unregistered. I showed him the proof of residency I got this morning, and he stared intently at it. Right after our wedding 10 years ago, when we were supposed to file our marriage certificate together, Rick said, "I have to go to the city office tomorrow. I'll submit it then," and took the certificate. The reason it wasn't submitted immediately was that Rick's father, who was unwell, insisted on attending to see his son's big day. Predictably, he became exhausted by the end of the ceremony, so we were busy taking him to the hospital and then back to the hotel. After returning from our honeymoon, I thought, now that I'm Mrs. Rick, I need to change the names on my driver's license, credit cards, and other stuff. What a hassle, but I guess I can't complain, right? I went to the city office to get a copy of the proof of residency, but the clerk told me there was no registration under Rick's surname. Puzzled, I requested it under my maiden name and received it easily. When I went to the registry office, I was informed we weren't married, no marriage certificate had been submitted. I panicked a bit at that time, but Rick continued to act like a loving husband, and he was busy training to become a gynecologist. I kept working full-time, so there were no benefits to being married anyway. I thought if we had a child, paternity might be an issue, but as long as our hearts were connected, the situation was fine by me. After explaining this, I said, thinking back, it's good we weren't legally married. With all this trouble now, being legally bound would have made things worse for me. Rick and Sophia looked confused again. I then took out some documents and spread them in front of them. I wonder why you didn't realize, but your prized maternity clinic has been struggling recently, hasn't it? I showed them copies of the clinic's cash ledger, accounts receivable, and fixed asset register. Rick looked clueless, but Sophia's face turned pale. So, it seems you really didn't know how the clinic's accounting was managed after excluding me. I explained that maintaining accurate books is basic accounting, but since Sophia took over, there were discrepancies between sales and cash deposits. Also, there were almost no receipts for cash payments. It was nearly a sieve-like situation.
Also, Rick, as a self-employed doctor, you're naturally supposed to pay into the national pension, but it seems you've defaulted. The bank account for the withdrawals has only 7 cents.
Rick seemed to finally understand the severity of his situation. He confronted Sophia. "Why did you do this? I could have handled it even without leaving it to that old lady." Sophia remained silent, looking down.
Moreover, at your clinic, procedures for employment insurance and workers' compensation for new staff are being neglected, and payments to food vendors for hospitalized patients are overdue.
What?
I added, "Plus, it seems staff salaries are delayed too. I found out from troubled staff members you contacted me." Rick turned to Sophia, demanding an explanation. Sophia, who had been pale-faced, retorted, "Shut up. You would care for a middle-aged man like you without any money." I couldn't listen anymore and interrupted, "Please save your personal squabbles for elsewhere. I demand alimony and asset division from you, Rick, and damages for defamation from you, Sophia. Keep that in mind." Rick and Sophia, who had stopped their quarrel, turned to face me. They are just alike, a perfect match of scoundrels.
Alimony and asset division. That's ridiculous. We weren't even married.
And I won't pay for defamation.
The lawyer then informed Rick that in a common law marriage, claims for alimony and asset division due to infidelity are recognized. Refusing to pay would only lead to court. To Sophia, he explained that her emails and calls to the clinic's contacts, smearing my reputation, were likely to be seen as defamation. Unlike private emails, the mass-sent email to multiple contacts aimed to tarnish my social standing likely had malicious intent. I warned, "If you refuse our claim, we'll take this to court. Your relationship with Rick will be proven in court and become a public record," I added, silencing them. After leaving the two speechless and slumped in their chairs, I exited the restaurant's private room. Subsequently, legal documents arrived, and they couldn't find any law firm to take their case. My letter of disownment to Rick's parents and stopping the financial support enraged his mother, who stormed the clinic, blaming Sophia for the chaos. Patient reviews and social media posts worsened the clinic's reputation. Frustrated staff quit, initiating a collective lawsuit for unpaid wages. Rick, seeking peace, surrendered all his assets for alimony, staff, and vendor payments. However, it wasn't enough. Additionally, Sophia's skimming and revenue discrepancies led to tax issues. Though not tax evasion, Rick had to pay extra taxes. These actions led to a bank reassessment, resulting in the clinic's seizure and bankruptcy. Sophia quickly paid the demanded amount, likely to evade Rick, who lost everything and might become a burden to her. Rumors say that Rick, once a respected doctor, nearly became homeless, wandering the streets at night looking for Sophia. As for me, the money received, though less than what I spent during 10 years with Rick, felt like buying my freedom for the future. Whether I see myself as just 38 or not, life's battles continue.